Hi, this is Tom Hedlund, and I've been a marriage and family therapist in California for over 42 years, working with families, couples, individuals, and helping them understand, and improve their function primarily in their relationships. And, of course, intimate relationships being the most important of all. This is going to be the second in a series of self-help and instructional videos that I'm creating for this YouTube channel. So if you like it, please click like, perhaps subscribe, maybe tell your friends. But I want to hopefully provide you some really solid information that may help you understand and improve your own function in relationships. And so let's start with the definition of what attachment is, because attachment is really the holy grail in human relationships from the time we are born in our very first and primary attachment, and carries all the way through our life, and is most critical when we get into our intimate relationships, especially when conflict comes into play, which it inevitably does. I covered some of that in the very first video that I dropped. So what is attachment? What is this thing called attachment? It's a special form of enduring emotional relationship with a specific person. It involves soothing, comfort, pleasure, and there's loss or threat of loss of that attachment creates distress in the human being. The child finds safety and security and comfort in the context of this attachment relationship to the mother. There are only three elements. This is really so crucial. There's only really three things that happen in attachment relationships. There's attunement, where you're understanding, things are flowing without conflict. There's sympathy, empathy, and understanding taking place. There's disruption. That's a whoops, all of a sudden there's some kind of a problem or conflict that's entered. There's a misunderstanding or a miscommunication where you're no longer attuned. And then the final, and what we find is most important, is the process of repair. That's it. Attunement, disruption, and repair. Disruption is inevitable. We have it inside ourselves. We're certainly going to have it with other people. And what's so crucial is being able to find effective repairs, because that brings us back into attunement, which is where all the goodies are in human relationships. The problems start to occur in childhood when the mother is not able, for whatever her reasons may be, and there could be a great many different kinds of reasons, is not able to stay attuned to the infant's and child's emerging developmental needs. So whenever that happens and there's a disruption in the relationship between the mother and the infant, what happens, it really falls upon the mother to figure out what's wrong and to make an effective repair. Now, this is where it begins, where things can really start to go off course right from the very beginning, because if the mother cannot attune to the child and make an effective repair in the disruption, what happens is the infant has to make the repair themselves. And as you might imagine, with a very immature brain and no perspective on what's going on, those are not going to be, they might be temporarily effective repairs, but they're not going to be the kinds of things. Those are the things that are really going to get in our way later on. And I'll go into much more specific detail about how that happens in future videos. There are, secure attachment creates a stable neurophysiology. Attachment is actually physiological. When you are, when you have a secure attachment, your heart rate is slower, your breath is slower. You're just more comfortable in your own skin. You're not going into some sort of stress or fear state that you need to regulate defensively. And when we are able to do this secure attachment and have this, we're able to regulate our own emotions. But in the absence of a stable attachment experience, the person's more vulnerable or disruptive. And this is where in adult relationships, we see people start to become defensive argumentative, withdrawn, the various kinds of tactics and strategies that we have to protect ourselves. So it starts off that we need to have a secure attachment to our caregiver, and then as that stable attachment progresses over the course of our child development, we gradually learn to have a secure attachment to ourselves, so that as we emerge into adulthood, we're able to withstand more difficult situations, more anxiety. We're able to regulate. There's I'll talk about it a little bit more, but you acquire this very critical developmental skill of differentiation, which allows you to regulate your emotions, manage anxiety, stay true to yourself, and be effective in your interactions, and tolerate the information that might be coming from another person, whether that may happen to be a boss or a partner, a parent, a child, or whoever it may happen to be. So there are really only, in terms of Mary Ainsworth's work on attachment styles, there's two different models. I'm just going to talk about one here. Ainsworth talked about there's a secure attachment style. It's pretty solid. All the things I described before. There's an anxious ambivalent style. This is where it's not so easy. There's anxiety in it, and there's a little approach and avoidance. You're not able to really settle in. So you're almost hovering a little bit in your, can I stay or do I have to go response, neurobiologically, psychologically, and emotionally. Anxious avoidant is a little more extreme, in which there's more anxiety in it. You're actually avoiding attachment. You're more ready to leave and avoid it than you are to engage emotionally and with your partner or whoever the other person may happen to be. And then the worst of all situations is a disorganized attachment. Now, one of the more interesting things that I want to put here is they were able to actually predict with pregnant women. They gave them an adult attachment inventory, and they were able to predict the attachment style of the child by assessing the mother on the inventory. And what they found, that if the mother has a cohesive, coherent, autobiographical narrative. That's a lot of words. It's cohesive, it makes sense, it's autobiographical, it's about herself, it's a story of her life, and it's a narrative. So it's a story she has that helps her make sense of her life. What happens when the parent has that? Any kind of trauma, any kind of issues, she's taken responsibility for, any of her own wounds, any of her own particular needs. So what happens if those don't get transferred to the child? The child doesn't have to make the adapted response to the mother or the parent. So again, what happens is development starts to go off course if the child has to make the adjustments instead of the parent. Some very interesting things. There's really only three things that happen developmentally with attachment. The first kind of attachment we have, which I've talked about, is the attachment for security. We're wired to seek safety and care in our most intimate relationships. So, when we're alarmed, we're concerned, we're distressed, we're wired. That's the infant's primary need in early life. As that one is satisfied, the next need is the caregiving response. And that's another attachment mechanism where now we're wired to give care. And in giving care, now this might be where, children start to forge relationships with their toys or their dolls or their teddy bears, and to some extent their friends. So that's the caregiving response. And then the final one, because these proceed in an order, although they do overlap, is the exploration. So we're able to be exuberant, curious, joy, and we're wired to learn and grow. Now, as what I want to try and help you understand is if you don't get the first one, the second one has to kick in too early. If you don't get enough of being wired to seek care in adequate amounts, all of a sudden the caregiving attachment comes into play, and this is where actually the roots of what we call codependency come from, because we're trying to take care of the other person to satisfy our own needs. But sometimes we'll abandon ourselves and our own needs to not be abandoned by them, which is one of the great tragedies and problems in human relationships. And so, and if the cascade of those first two don't work really progressively and adequately, then we're going to be wired to be more defensive in the world rather than more curious and more joyful and more playful. One of the things that we know when we look at, some of these issues that sometimes are mistakenly called post-traumatic stress disorder, it's actually complex traumatic stress disorder from childhood, is children lose their ability to play. They become much more serious, or they're more concerned about their security than they are about being able to just run and play and be carefree, which is something that we all can just use so much of. So to recap a little bit of this, what happens is begins with the secure attachment to the other person. Gradually, we form a secure attachment to ourselves. So now I can do for me what I used to need be done for me by my caregivers. And secure attachment to myself allows me to be able to not have to drop into regressions, defenses, and fight, flight, freeze reactions, because I'm able to stand up for myself. I'm able to listen to you, engage you, be curious about you, the things I talked about in the very first video, and be curious about that. And what that does is it leads us into the process of developing a really healthy form of what the skills called differentiation, where we can express and initiate congruently in our relationships, manage the anxiety that comes from disclosing things to somebody who may or may not be able to be receptive and reinforcing or supportive at that time. So these skills allow us a whole robust way to be present in a relationship, be present to ourselves, and to be also present for our partner. And so everybody feels more in love, more loving, and also more loved too when you're able to acquire these skills. So, the steps in this are, just so you know, because, what I'm talking about here is like the very first step in this is unconscious incompetence. We don't know, right? Most of the people that I've encountered in therapy, they've already exhausted their whole skill set when they've reached out for help. They just don't know what they don't know. Maybe they're moving into the second step, which is conscious incompetence, or at least I know I don't know, which is, a step towards humility and self-reflection, that I need some help because whatever it is that I'm doing, it's just not bringing me the results that I want. Then we move into the next stage, which we'll call conscious competence. This is where you now know what the right skills are and how you can use them in the relationship. And as you practice, you're literally building new circuits in your brain and actually developing more adult skills rather than those primitive mechanisms that you learn so early in your life that are just doomed to fail, sadly so. And then the final stage is unconscious competence, which means now you've practiced it so well that you're competent, you're capable, and you're able to do this without any thought. It becomes much more automatic. And if you happen to, for some reason, dysregulate or get triggered, you're able to regulate that, as I said in the first video, bring it back and bring yourself stable and continue in the conversation. And what I would just to kind of recap this then, so you're able, whenever you fall out of attunement with your partner or your child or whomever it may happen to be, you're able to recognize the disruption and then go turn to yourself, see what you need to shift in you, turn to them, see what it is that they need from you, perhaps, in that interaction. And you're able to make a repair. Again, John Gottman's work, who's really the foremost leading authority on this, is fundamentally repair is the most crucial mechanism in adult human relationships that is problematic, and for all the reasons that I've said. What Gottman and others have found is even average good enough parenting is that 30% of the time you're attuned. You don't have to be attuned all the time. It's impossible. You know, the critical thing is you're able to recognize when you're not, and you're able to produce an effective repair. Now, I'm not going to go into the number of different kinds of repair mechanisms. That would be too much and too complex right now for this particular video. But I want you to just consider, you know, the possibility of that, you know, that it may be your attachment style, or maybe some learning that that took place that took you off course. And and I really want to encourage you to know that there's really good help available to help you really reestablish yourself in a healthy, satisfying, and productive way in relationship. So thank you very much for listening today.